You started Gumroad. It has a storied history. And a few years ago, at the exact same time that Backstage Capital, my venture fund, was raising a Reg CF, you were raising a Reg CF. You sold it
Mhm.
out in minutes and hours, one day, I think it was, millions of
Yeah.
dollars. And so now you have thousands and thousands of people who are investors in Gumroad, and you do these public board meetings, or like, what do you call them?
I honestly don't even know what to call them. I used to call them public board meetings. Now I call them public all hands. I don't know if I'm set on a name, but basically, just public meetings, like just keeping everyone town halls, maybe we'll rename them. I don't know.
Yeah.
Uh, but I just want to kind of communicate like things that you don't really see uh in terms of the decision making behind why a company makes certain decisions. uh, Partly as a marketing exercise, but mostly as a social exercise. I think it's just a really good way to meet people and get feedback too. I think like it's just really helpful. Like I'm, kind of a solo founder, and so I've always kind of sought feedback from lots of people, and so why not get feedback from whoever wants to tune in and watch? And it tends to be a really great tool for getting feedback. Also, recruiting people can learn a lot about the kind of person I am, the kind of company that I run, the goals that we have, and kind of self-select in or out of the hiring process, like pretty confidently, without having to, you know, fly to New York or like have, a coffee meeting or have multiple series of interviews. You can just kind of get a good sense without having to invest a lot of your own personal time. So I think that's a few of the reasons that we do it.
Are employees hearing a lot of what you're saying for the first time in that context? Or do you have a pre-meeting before the public meeting?
We do not have a pre-meeting. Yeah, that is kind of like the first time that they will hear those things in that way. They'll have access to the deck as I work on it, and I'm asking for feedback on the deck. And so there are kind of, there's that. Ideally there's no surprises. Like the goal is not to say, hey, there are all these changes that we're making to the company now. It's kind of
Right.
a reflective, just like a board meeting generally is. You're kind of informing the board what the team has been up to, more so than kind of making decisions with the board and then informing the team of those decisions, I think. Um, yeah, so that's kind of like the format. And it's I just started actually recently doing one-on-ones with people on the team now that we have a few people in the office, and even via Zoom, I've started doing a few. And so my hope is to actually build more and more feedback before the meeting actually happens, uh, and sort of highlight certain things. But yeah, generally it's not. I learned it very early starting the company. One of the first pieces of feedback I got was don't surprise people. Like surprises are a failure case, generally. But bad surprises, most surprises in business are not good surprises generally. And so you want to kind of avoid those, make sure people know. That's always been the way I've run the business. Some people, like, they run a business, they don't know, they don't tell anyone like they're going to do a layoff next week or something. I tend to tell people like, hey, these numbers are not where they need to be, and try to
Yep.
like allow people to have the space to make decisions on their own with lead time, but then also give me feedback because I'm often wrong. uh, so I kind of just have taken that through and through. I've made a lot of changes like running the business over time over the last 14 years, but that's something I've always been pretty consistent about, is just like being pretty public and transparent.
Yeah. And just for anyone who is not familiar with Gumroad, or they are, but they don't realize how well it's doing, what is your public revenue, kind of those sort of
Mhm.
metrics? How many
Yeah, so
transactions do you do a year, that kind of thing?
yeah, we do a lot. I mean, it's kind of crazy. We do about 300,000 transactions a month, so millions and millions a year. We do about $150 million in GMV for creator earnings per year. The business itself does about 15 to $20 million in revenue now. Uh, of that, I think last year we did about a little under 9 million in net income. we had a lot of net sort of operating losses. So this year it'll be less just because we now pay taxes to the federal government, which is cool. That's a milestone many companies never reach is paying taxes, though I'm
Mhm.
pretty proud of that actually. And yeah, and then we have about 25 people who either full-time, part-time, or as contractors work on the business.
Yeah. And we'll talk a little bit about a change that you made recently there that I think is really interesting. I wanted to talk about Gumroad itself. First of all, do you think about like acquirers? Do they come knocking?
So every once in a while, I get a DM from someone, who's like, "Hey, I run this business that's, does email marketing or does commerce or does payments, and we think Gumroad would be a good fit." But it's never really. Generally, they are kind of looking for a good deal more so than like oh, we can together build something greater. It's sort
Mm,
of a way of just extracting cash from the Gumroad machine. And so, yeah, I've never gone that far with something I was that excited about in terms of like, oh, I could really help you and you could really help us. And yeah, I just think for better or worse, like I'm the right person to run the business, and I have sort of I have kind of like this owner operator mindset where I own enough the business, it's profitable enough that I think anyone else who would buy it would sort of abuse it in a way because they wouldn't own enough. They would have like my cost basis on starting the business was zero. So
mhm.
it's all kind of gravy for me at this point. And so I think I'm like I kind of will make the least harsh decisions. I will run it the most long term. Um, so yeah, I could see myself revisiting that decision. The most likely outcome, I think, is to actually hand it off to the team,
Yeah.
and just kind of give them a bunch more equity and allow them to just kind of make a lot of the operational decisions over time and run it, kind of participate in the board and then become the first public board member, in a way,
Yeah.
and just
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah, and you've built over the years, you've built it to be something you could do that with. I mean, that kind of decision is hard to make when you have an incredible amount of venture backing, which you have some, but
Hmm.
you've kind of constructed it to be as long as you have the energy for it and the desire to work there, to lead, you can do that, right? It seems like that from afar, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of companies end up in a place where they effectively need to exit to some degree. Either they have employees that have signed up for that journey, they have a lot of investors that have signed up for that journey, they have commitments that require them to do so in sort of financial or social reasons. And so yeah, I'm super lucky, even for example, being able to leave San Francisco when I did, right? Like a lot of
Mm,
founders don't really have that choice because it would signal to investors that like they're kind of no longer on that sort of IPO path. And I also think that being a solo founder is helpful because even if you are in a position like this, if you have partners, it's hard to go against the grain as a committee, as a partnership. It often kind of takes like just one person having an idea and
mm,
pursuing it. And so, yeah, I think for a whole host of reasons, like it's kind of a unique place where you just it's both. I think it's unique in the context of the world, like the bubble that we're kind of in. There are a lot of restaurants, right, that are just a chef, owner, operator who has a great restaurant in New York and they've been doing it for 25 years and one day they'll stop. But I think in the context of tech and software, it is much more rare to kind of end up in this position because
mm,
yeah, you kind of sign the rights away, literally or figuratively, to running the business and really being in charge. In order to raise the capital, you may need to hire expensive software engineers without really even knowing that you may be doing that. And then it makes it very challenging to say, oh, actually, I just want to run the business and like issue dividends yearly. Like,
mm.
just not tenable to a lot of the people who are on the cap table at that point. And I was concerned, honestly. I mean, I do have investors, as you mentioned, VCs, Excel, first round. And I had to go, one by one and say, hey, I want to kind of do this dividend thing. And I was able to do that because I couldn't get fired in a sense, right? Like I wasn't scared that if they said they could still say no, but they wouldn't be able to like terminate me from the leadership of the company. Or you can kind of see how some people like Sam Altman, like when they try to be creative with the way that they run the business, there's a lot of downside risk to
Mm.
potentially to making those kinds of decisions, and potentially even just like sharing your plans with people where one day you wake up and you're no longer the CEO of the company.
Yeah. Speaking of harsh decisions, you mentioned earlier, I don't remember when it was because time has no meaning anymore, but it was probably 2 years ago that you decided to raise your fees to 10% or something across the board. And I remember during that time, it was like pitchforks out. They were coming for you. The townspeople were coming for you. And then you had a
Yeah.
really great interview with Arvind, I think is his name. I thought that was really good because he was one of the most vocal detractors and was mostly upset, but then had this incredible interview that I thought was just so balanced and fair and pushed enough and did all the things. And in that interview, one of the things you said was that your wife tells you that sometimes it's hard for you to know when people are upset or that you don't seem upset enough. You know what I mean? Like, and I just thought about that a little bit. To look at it now, it's in the rear view, and I'm bringing it up, but it's in the rear view, right? You and I share this thing where we go through public scrutiny quite a bit, but we
Mhm.
kind of see around corners and we go big to make mistakes, but also because some of these things actually work out. What is that
Yeah.
like during that time when you put this out in the world and it's like an oh shit moment? And then what is it like later when it's no one's thinking about it?
Yeah. I mean, certainly in the moment, it triggers this sort of fight or flight response where even though you may have like high confidence in the decision you're making, just a lot of stuff that comes at you that is very personal and makes you it kind of combines like the sort of professional and personal parts of your life in a way, uh, which is not always a good thing. And yeah, you just kind of become like the center of attention, but in a very sort of negative way, like Dr. Ali Luke's was last week or so. And no one really knows, right? I mean, like so many people, like at the end of the day, you have more data than anyone else does on the decision you're making and why you're making it. Uh, but also going into it, it's important to like understand that because of that, people will be upset. Like they won't be able to empathize with you completely. And eventually you will be in the future where people will be kind of more like where you were then, where they will also have acquired the data, mostly the data showing that it was kind of the right decision, people not leaving the platform at the rate that they may have expected, or the product not going to crap, or actually the product getting much better because we actually have margin to hire more people and build more product features and help creators make more money on a net basis. Uh, and yeah, I think the thing that I try to like keep in mind going through those things is like eventually it's like right now it's a you versus me sort of conversation, but eventually we're going to be on the same side. We're going to be in the future looking back at both of us in the past and being like, oh, wasn't it funny that like you really had a problem with me doing this thing, and you had some good points, and uh at the end of the day, like it is what it is, like I think the most important thing that I went kind of going into that was I'm not changing my mind here. Like the goal is not to uh sort of like the goal of that interview with Arvin was I had this interesting thought yesterday, which is sometimes you need help and sometimes you need love.
Mm.
And when you I was thinking actually in the context of AI, like when you need help, you may go to AI, but when you need love, like AI is not going to provide that for you. And I think it's like that interview was more about like love, and it was more about like we can have a conversation and talk through this thing. At the end of the day, I'm not going to help you in the sense that I'm not going to like solve your problem, which is Gumroad is now more expensive, but I can at least like give you attention. You can give me attention. We can have like an experience where we're
Mm.
kind of learning about each other, and I get to learn about why you're so frustrated and how it came across to you, and how I may have been able to maybe write a better email about the pricing decision, even though the pricing decision is not changed. And it's, yeah, it's just, I think, kind of like a form of trauma in a way. Like it's an experience that sticks with you for the rest of your life and will affect how you make future decisions down the road. And Gumroad will have other events like that in the future if all goes well, right? Like
Yeah,
the
yeah.
we'll have more, otherwise we won't exist. Like I think part of running a business is to kind of zig when everyone is zagging, and that always
Mm.
is going to cause some level of tension. And what I told the team recently was like the one thing I can't, like the upside of being on the bleeding edge is you get to participate in like the decision making of like innovation and things that benefit us, we get to experience first. The downside is the things that hurt and the hard decisions we're going to make first.
Yeah.
When the interest rates go up and we have to increase
Mm.
prices, or we have to do a round of layoffs, or we have to do XYZ thing when AI comes around, we will also be on the bleeding edge of that. And so there's kind of a, every pro is a con. And
Yeah. It's that whole thing of like when you're first to something, there's the arrows in the back because
mhm,
you're leading people into what the new is, but there's you've exposed yourself to that
yes,
scrutiny. And
100%.
it's interesting to hear you use the word trauma because that's what I've experienced with some of that. And I think that it doesn't mean that I stop, and it doesn't mean that I don't believe in it. It just means that we are human. Like this is really affecting us. It's like one tweet for someone, but it's like, a paper cut, death by paper cut for us. But it's interesting, and I like even, yeah, I like that the way that you said about the help versus love. Even in relationships, like sometimes I'm quick to try to help the situation instead of just listening.
Yes, yeah,
And
definitely.
that's exactly what was needed then. You were seeing a trend. Explain that just a little bit. What were you seeing in that moment that you said, we're going to need to raise prices at the macro level?
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, I think, basically COVID was ending, or kind of we were on the other side of the half-life, and interest rates were going up, and basically we had been experiencing, and it was frankly kind of news to me. I mean, I knew it on like a maybe like an intellectual level, but not on a, like I didn't really grok the sort of, basically that interest rates had been so low for so long, at basically 0% for 20 years, like basically since 9/11, 2001, that effectively like startups and like just risky things were just in this sort of boom cycle for so
Mhm.
long, underpinned by this, the fact that you couldn't make money by giving money to your bank, so you had to like try other things. And there was just that, every university endowment, every sovereign wealth fund, everyone was trying to generate yield, and so that generally pushes like a lot of capital to VC and to startups and to technology and software and the internet and all these sorts of things. And then COVID was kind of like the end of like this mega euphoria. And basically I just realized like there's a transition, that we're going from like just this like super long-term aspiration of building crazy businesses in 30 years, versus to now a world in which we have to kind of realize we still need to grow, we still need to build cool things, but we also need to realize profits and focus on a sort of more sustainable path of building a business, because they're effectively just alternative investments. There's now other places you can go
Mhm.
to get 4 or 5, 6% a year, 10% a year. And so you have to kind of offer investors both. Before, you could kind of say, we're only offering you the potential for this massive outcome. And that was enough. And for, some spheres today, even it's probably enough for some people. But I think for me, and especially as like running the business, like not having not being a venture capital firm on it, like on my own personal allocation basis, I needed to make sure that Gumroad was going to work. And as I told someone yesterday, like the goal is not to make money in the future. The goal is to make money now, like,
Mhm.
and also in the future. But, a good predictor of that is to make money now. And, basically operating it like most businesses have to do that, can't raise capital, right? Like if you're a coffee shop, you can't say, oh, we'll make money in 7 years, or, If
Yeah.
you're a gym, or any of these things, an apartment complex, you have to kind of think about, okay, what's the sustainable path that effectively means that we have to earn money from customers giving us money, and then utilize that to sort of like drive new customers to give us money, and et cetera, et cetera. And actually, one thing I learned through this experience is this is kind of how a lot of these companies were built pre 2001. Like, it's not like Google
100%.
raised billions and billions of dollars. They actually raised like $25 million or something like this. And then they got to profitable. And then
Hmm.
they used the profits to keep going. And a lot of these companies like raised like one round of financing and then IPO'd and then kind of continued to do that. And so, yeah, just kind of almost kind of going back to basics, right? Like, kind of like, I feel like gravity was turned on again, and it's like, okay, we can still do stuff, but we have to do stuff in like on Earth, not on the moon.
Mm-hmm. And you saw that, and you saw that it needed to be more profitable, essentially. It just needed to make sense. The math had the math. You are
Mhm.
the conversation that started this conversation is I reached out to you and just said that I'm inspired by you, and it's true. Um, and what caused me to say that was your message out to investors about um I guess five companies or five projects, five products that you have. It reminds me a lot of Alphabet. I'm sure you feel that
Mhm.
and maybe you're inspired by it. Tell me about the the thought process and the meaning behind having so many different and I'm saying it out loud, but I'm hearing myself and I have so many different, but having so many different products that to me feel very aligned with each other, but they are each
Mhm.
of them look like they could be their own 20-person run team.
Yeah. So, I mean, I started thinking about this in about 2022, similar to when we increased prices, actually, or started thinking about doing that, because I felt like I had learned so much from running Gumroad, but it was a company that I started when I was like 19 years old.
Mm,
And I just felt like I had learned so much since then. And I was trying to sort of contort Gumroad into solving problems that just wasn't able to solve, or even if we were able to solve it, like, the interesting thing about network effects is, one of the pros is that it makes it easier and easier to like acquire customers for that specific thing.
mhm,
But one of the downsides is it makes it very difficult to say, hey, we do this other totally new thing now. And people are like, no, you don't. Like, your Gumroad does this. And so, similar to, yeah, Google and Alphabet and Facebook and Meta, I just felt like I wanted to start solving other problems in a similar way. I have the kind of similar goals, and I have a similar sort of way of looking at things. Uh, but wanted the sort of optionality of trying out new things. And so I started looking at the sort of the Gumroad P&L and saying, like, I really enjoy running the business and coming up with ideas and shipping features, but there's a lot of stuff that I don't enjoy, or at least not in the way that we currently do it. It's kind of more of a necessary evil than a thing that I enjoy doing. And I was also inspired by the subreddit anti-work, which is kind of a sort of socialisty type group of people that just talk about this. They kind of joke that unemployment should be everybody, for everybody, not just the rich, and like the rich don't
mm,
work. And I like this. It kind of got in my head of like, yeah, it's interesting that like there are things that I really do like doing, but there's also a lot of things that I don't like doing. We often call those things work. And Gumroad thematically helps people create. Like, the goal is not to work, but to actually come up with the cool things and make them and share them with your audience. And if they give you money, then you can spend more time doing what you want to do instead of doing something you don't want to do. And so I applied that to kind of Gumroad as a company and said, okay, what are all the things that I don't enjoy doing? One is like, I don't enjoy uh creating offer letters and like having people sign them and then having them invoice me because they're a contractor that lives in India, and it's, yeah, then looking at their PDF and then, you know, sending them a wire and all these things. And so I built Flexile, and then Helper, it just, like, the way we were doing customer support just felt so archaic. It felt like it was a role that people in the company didn't enjoy doing. And AI was starting to ramp up. And so I said, oh, I feel like we could make this a lot better. And the companies that we use are not moving fast enough. So why don't we just build Helper? And it was really honestly just kind of a coincidence that Gumroad and Flexile just were next to each other in the alphabet. That I said, oh, it would be
Mm,
funny to just kind of keep going. And so, and it kind of directs the attention, otherwise you're just, there's anything. I mean, you could do
yeah.
anything in the world, any word, any kind of company. And so it just helped me narrow down to like, okay, we can basically try to have 20 or so products that are solving these problems that are all about basically they're people who are creators, creative people, artists, and there's all these other things they have to do, whether it's support, whether it's content moderation on their service, whether it's paying freelancers, profit sharing, setting up a stock option plan. There's a lot more. I mean, I can look at the P&L and see all sorts of things that we do that is are there's having to open the door when someone rings the doorbell, right? Like there's doing writing. If you're an engineer, you build a feature, but then you have to write tests for the feature. Uh, there's so many things. Today I was doing stuff I didn't enjoy doing, and so I just feel like there's a large canvas of coming up with ideas. And I also think the other thing that I think is important about the alphabet thing is it focuses our efforts on automation. And I'm like, it's only
Mm,
going to be possible to do this if we're really good at only doing the things we enjoy doing.
yeah.
Because otherwise you're going to get bogged down, you're going to run out of energy. You're not going to get to the end of the marathon in 26 miles, right? Like you're going to run out of steam at mile 8 or 9 or 10. And so it's just core to building these products that building these products should actually help us build the rest. And
Yeah.
I do think maybe we'll even potentially acquire other companies that are in line with our ethos. And if we can really automate things, then I think there's like a sort of a private company or private equity, excuse me, or holding company type approach to this. And instead of people buying Gumroad, actually Antiwork ends up buying some of these other companies and putting them in a portfolio of things.
Well,
And
it'll
yeah.
make it harder for me to, then you have the other Sahil who's doing his roll-ups. Do you know Sahil Bloom, right?
Oh yes, yes.
Yeah, he does his roll-ups. It's very different though. It's a different vibe and what he's solving for. And model. Your model is more hands-on as far as I can understand it. Um,
Yes.
but
I enjoy building things and coming up with ideas and being a designer and coming up with the name and the logo. And I just love coming up with new ideas. And
yeah,
I don't enjoy the business stuff, actually. That's like to a degree it's interesting and intellectually stimulating, but certainly if I had to pick one, I would be, you
yeah.
know, a I would be whiteboarding all day long.
I feel like you and Nathan Barry should do something with Kit and Gumroad and anti-work.
Yeah,
I mean,
Nathan was a Gumroad creator back in the day. I haven't talked to him in a
mm,
while. He's reached out about acquiring Gumroad, but I think we're kind of too the companies are kind of too similar in size or something. But yeah,
okay.
I think he probably even with the rename to Kid, I think he's kind of probably thinking about okay, what
Yeah,
other problems can we solve for creators and creative people?
yeah, yeah. One of the things that your companies and do, one of the things they do is the dividends. They actually execute on the dividends that you give out to the Reg CF investors. First of all, how did you make that work? Is it through Gumroad? It seems like it's from Flexile. And second of
Hmm.
all, what is that model? Do you do an annual dividend? Or because it's the technical way. I looked at that when you did that a few months ago, and I was like, I could use that. That's really
Hmm.
interesting. And then it's the idea itself. We've been working on dividends and that for years at Backstage because I'm building something so different too. It's not your average VC firm. So when I saw that, I just looked at it. What made you like, what is that model? And then how do you pull it off?
Yeah, so the model is at least the current plan. We're still iterating on it and finding the right approach, I think. But basically, we take 60% of our annual net income and we dividend it out to investors. And we also do an annual tender offer, kind of a stock buyback.
Mm,
So for people who say this is not for me or I want some extra liquidity now or whatnot, we do a sort of an auction process. And but yeah, basically we I was reading this book, The Intelligent Investor, because as interest rates went up, I was like, well, how do you run a business in a world with high interest rates, quote unquote, relatively high? Uh, well, you can read books from that era of when interest rates were that high again, right? Like in the 80s, 60s, really a lot of the 20th century. And so there's this book, The Intelligent Investor, about it. And so I read this book, and in there, there's a quote that just says, really, even without backing it up, it just says like the standard 60% dividend.
Mm.
And I just thought, oh, okay, well, if that was the standard back then, like that seems like a reasonable standard today, 60%. You still
Yeah.
have 40% to pay taxes with, or to do whatever, to do a buyback or to reinvest in the business. But if you're profitable, inherently you have extra capital. Like you've already invested the rest in the business in theory through all the stuff that's not profit, right? And so I thought 60% was a good starting place. It would help me kind of communicate to investors this is something I wanted to do, and I didn't have to come up with, just the standard, that kind of thing. And so the first part was I had to convince investors, like, hey, I want to do this. Could you let me? Because I had to get approval from them to do this. And so
Mhm,
I've kind of had
mhm.
calls with, Excel and all the other investors on the cap table. And they were like, yeah, if you think this is what you want to do, like, feel free. Like, seems reasonable. And so I got them to kind of agree. And then technically I had to do it, right? Like actually execute on the promise. And so that was a little bit intense, where I talked to a lot of people. I talked to Kickstarter because I had read that they had done a dividend before, and I talked to some other people, and basically everybody was like, why are you like, you're doing this yourself? Like what, like you should."
Mhm.
And I talked to a bank, I talked to some, crypto company about it. I talked to Republic because they had done our, help similar to you, like help with their crowd fund. And everyone was like, "Man, there's not like you're basically want to dividend 7,000 people. Like
Yep.
that's kind
Yeah.
of a lot of work, and like it's
Yeah.
expense. It's going to be super expensive if you hire a bank to do it. They're just going to mail like 7,000 checks. There's going to be a bunch of like bounce backs, and so at the time I had already built FlexStyle to handle payments to freelancers and to contractors and 1099 filings at the end of the year, and so I just was like, well, why don't we just build this into FlexStyle? Like FlexStyle
Mm.
doesn't yet have clear product market fit. There's Deal, there's Remote, there's a lot of other companies offering freelancer payments. It's not game changing. When I had the idea, it was actually before Deal and Remote. I just was busy with Gumroad, and I didn't really have a team. And this was about 2017. And so I was just like, I think we should just do it. And everyone was like, this is like weird. You're gonna have like the same platform is gonna handle like payments, and also, for
Mhm.
freelancers, and
Mhm.
also do like cap table management and dividends. And I was just looking at Carta, and I was like, this is not a great piece of software. Like we spent a lot of
Mhm.
money on it. I think we can just do it. Like I don't see why not. And so we just did it. We just basically used the same sort of tech stack that we had, and just added investors as like a table in our database. And of course, there was like a lot of stuff we had to figure out along the way, but we effectively had a very similar kind of onboarding experience, except as a freelancer, you're now signing up as an investor. You're giving us your tax ID, you're giving us all your information.
Mhm.
Instead of issuing 1099 ints, we're now, or miscs, we're now submitting 1099 divs to the IRS. But in theory, it was like conceptually kind of like a very similar thing. And so we just emailed everybody and said, hey, we're issuing you a dividend. We had to work with our lawyers, and we spent quite a bit of money in just like updating our charter so we could do it.
Mhm.
And we've done two now so far for ourselves, and we've helped three other companies do theirs.
Yeah.
And so it works. I mean, it's a reasonable thing. And actually, like, it's funny because on one hand, it's super unique and weird, but on the other hand, if you actually read like the charter of a Delaware-based C corporation, the whole point of a C corp is to issue dividends to your common stock holders.
Mhm.
Like actually the first paragraph in our certificate of incorporation, literally it's just like issue dividends. And so it's just what happens is you raise money. The first thing investors will do is say, we have the ability to block the right to issue a common stock dividend. So you just forget about it, basically, that this right
Mhm.
exists. And then 14 years later, you kind of like unearth this document that tells you you can do this. And the only reason you can't is because there's a clause like on page 17 that says 80, you need 80% of preferred to allow a common stock dividend. And so we updated the charter. We send everyone an email, everyone logs in, they fill out their information. They can see like a nice, pretty simple little cap table with everyone's equity percentage. Now we do tender offers. So, you'll get, once a year, you'll get an email that says, hey, we're doing a buyback. This is the amount. You log in, you submit a bid.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then we do this reverse Dutch auction where we kind of start from zero and find the equilibrium price. And then everyone gets that price. And I just really feel like I want to run the business so smoothly. And if you look at like doing all this, like it's like lawyers and accountants, it's all manual and you have to work with like all these different providers. And I really just think that we could build like a Gumroad level product, but for like running a business.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know. The other thing is I truly I really like building stuff. So if most people would be like, why would you build that? Right? Like, why would you waste your time like building this? Why don't you just pay
Yeah.
someone like 100 grand to send out 7,000 checks? But that's like, to me, I'm like, but why not? Like, that sounds so fun. Like, we get to work on a completely new problem. I get to
Mhm.
design all these features. And we literally, I think, have the chance to build like the best in class software. Like, if you think about, to be honest, the bar is not very high. If you look at cap table management or like dividend, I mean, there's like, the company is from like the 90s that were built to
Yeah.
solve this
Yeah.
problem.
Believe me, I agree. I agree. I mean, we could take this for another couple of hours on how much I agree with that. Um, Speaking of agreeing and not agreeing, I'm really
Mhm.
curious because the reason I'm going to ask you this is because I know you'll answer, which is kind of cool. Where do you sit in this whole like in the politics of things, in the VC kind of paying for Trump to win, which is true. It's also my opinion, but it's true. The woke, non-woke movements. Where do you
Yeah.
sit and what decision do you make about how much you'll say? Because I don't keep up with you when it comes to that. So I don't know your
Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because I think the only thing I've said this year on Twitter about this whole thing is I'm voting for Biden.
For
So I
Biden?
didn't, yeah, I tweeted
Yeah,
I'm voting for Biden. And
yeah,
so
yeah,
I didn't get to do that.
yeah.
Unfortunately, I guess. But I mean, he's still our president. So, but yeah, I mean, I think I really think that remote and COVID was just really bad for politics in general and for just social relationships in general. I think I saw it within the company, outside the company, and you see it on Twitter and all these things. Like, I just think that the biggest issue is that people just don't talk to each other, and then both sides at least present themselves as like very radical. I think most people I
Hmm.
know are not that radical. They're like, oh, I think that the government should be more efficient, or oh, I think that we should be more pro-immigration or whatever. And I just think it those things don't really go viral. So you have to you end up seeing the stuff that's most incendiary. And it's kind of like the pricing thing, like on Gumroad, it's just
Hmm.
like you just see the worst responses and like the most, and then
Yeah.
it kind of um yeah, I don't know. I do think that there's just this, at least my feeling of it, to be honest, is that America just does this sine curve of politics and it just transfers like party ownership. And I think that's mostly because the system we have is basically the primaries elect the candidate on either side. And so generally what ends up happening is you have like, let's say someone amazing, uh, like Obama, and that basically gets everyone super excited. So a bunch of people vote for Obama and he wins. But then generally those people end up getting complacent. And so they don't vote as much. And the other side gets angry about all these sorts of things. So they become more active and more sort of radical. And then the thing, kind of pendulum shifts over there. And then it kind of just swings back and forth over and
Mhm.
over again. And, you have Clinton and then Bush and then Obama and then Trump, and in this case is like Obama, Trump, Biden, Trump, right? I mean, like
Yeah.
the same country, like the same electorate. uh is kind of flip-flopping between people like that. And like you can't have modern, like it just doesn't, it's not
Yeah, it
allowed
doesn't
in the way
exist
that
anymore. Yeah.
and I think that the good news, I think, at least, is that at the end of the day, like they can't do what they want to do. Like they have to, there are a lot of checks and balances. And so I think generally a lot of what both sides want to do fail in the sense that you end up, for better or worse, with like a lot of moderate positions. Like Obamacare was, in my opinion, like relatively moderate. It was based off Romney's plan
Mm.
for healthcare in Massachusetts. Uh, yeah, so I'm sort of generally, I think I'm optimistic in the sense that like I don't think Trump is going to be so terrible. I think he was president for 4 years already,
You
and he
don't think he
wasn't
already is terrible though? He is terrible. So how is he
I mean,
not going?
terrible in terms of like the policies.
Well, that's what I mean. I don't. I mean, we know what I think about his personality, but or you know, anyway, his rap sheet.
Yeah, yeah,
I'm
he's
saying
yeah.
he's already proven, in my opinion, he's already proving out that he's going to be terrible because he's choosing like horrible people to be in these positions that he's, putting up, and he's like he doesn't care anymore. I'm going to be with the white nationalists. I'm going to certainly surround myself with sexual offenders, or some of them convicted, some of them not. You know what I mean? So
Mhm.
I guess, where does your optimism come from? Is it in that he's going to be checked and balanced, or is it that he's going to be not so bad because for some reason I don't quite get?
Yeah, it's mostly that, at the end of the day, you can pick like a Secretary of State that has opinions, but at the end of the day, the Secretary of State is just one person
Yeah,
in a massive organization.
yeah.
And I think that like the government is not a company, in the sense that it's you can buy a company and then fire like 99% of the people, or that you don't like, and just keep the ones you do, and sort of really, like, let's say you want to deport 20 million Americans or something like this. That's just not possible in the federal government, at least historically. I mean, you could, I don't know. I do think like maybe I'm sort of like wrong. I could be wrong about this, but I think America is just so good at remaining a democracy. There are other places where I think they sort of tend to have a history of going through like fascist dictatorships. And I grew up in Singapore, which is a fascist dictatorship. But most people would consider it a pretty benevolent one, but it is,
Mm.
it has corporal punishment, it has
Yeah.
deportation, it has incredibly strong immigration laws. Uh, it has a party that owns every seat except for one in the parliament. Uh, but it doesn't have freedom of press. It doesn't have, freedom of a lot of things. And I just think America is it's the best country in the world. I really believe that. It's just like this magical place where you can say whatever you want. And I can say like, fuck Trump. I can say fuck Biden. I can say fuck Obama. And I don't have any fear that that's going to come back and haunt me. Uh,
Mm.
and it just has a history of like being like truly sort of, it's never, I don't know, maybe I could be wrong, but it might, it's never been a fascist dictatorship. And I think
No,
it's,
no, it hasn't in the past. No, no.
and so I guess that's a lot of where my optimism
Yeah,
comes from, is just
yeah.
this idea that at the end of the day, I mean, I would say the worst thing about Trump to me is the whole January 6th sort of stuff. Because I think that's the biggest fear that I have, is that it could descend to something like that. And it's certainly not ideal that he did those things or said those things or whatnot. And it looks like JD Vance knows that too, which is why he never answers the question about that.
Yeah.
Uh, but it's the good news is that it like, as soon as people start talking like that, like Americans get fed up, and it won't be long until Democrats are back in power. And
Hmm.
um,
So some people say that it'll probably be 20 years before Democrats are back in party because of the pendulum has swung so far. You're thinking it's more like going to be 4 to 8.
yeah, I just I think, I mean, if you think about I remember when people were saying that like Republicans were never going to win the popular vote ever again. And it's the only way they can win is with the Electoral College. They said that like the day before Trump won the popular vote, right? So I just think like, uh, I think the most important thing is to listen to what Americans want. And there's 300 million Americans who have a lot of different opinions, and they're very fickle in a way. They're like creators, right? Creators they have a lot of leverage and they have a lot of choices, and it doesn't take a long time for someone to pop up out of nowhere to just galvanize people and gets them super excited. And I don't think anyone would have thought that Obama was that relevant in 2004, or, and
Mhm.
4 years later, he's the president, right? And
Mhm.
Trump is a great example, honestly, that like I think everyone thought that the Republican Party was super screwed for a long time because Obama was so awesome and everyone was like kind of tended towards like this sort of liberalism approach. And then even when Trump won Iowa, people said, "Oh, that's only more evidence that the party is even more screwed," right? Or whatnot.
Mhm.
And then when like Biden stepped down for Kamala to run, everyone was like, "Wow, she has it in the bag." And she didn't,
Yeah.
and so
Yeah.
I just think the American people are very unpredictable. And
Yeah.
so yeah, I think you don't really know. And AOC would be old enough to run, and will she win? I can't tell. I don't know. Like I
Yeah.
really,
Yeah. I hope
if you
I
asked
hope
me
she's,
who would have won, I would have been wrong on almost every
yeah.
election in the past, right? I'm
Well,
not
what
good
we
at
kind of
it.
know, what we kind of know is that a woman won't win anytime soon. That's just not going to happen. AOC, I think I really like her, and I think that she is someone who could run, but I think she even knows that she wouldn't win because she's a woman. And chip on my shoulder or not, I think it's just we've just proven that multiple times, or at least twice, three times. And I think that I want her somewhere where she's like telling the candidate what to do, like being the
Mhm.
person that's like, this is what you do, the right hand, maybe their VP or whatever, but it just it won't be
Yeah,
political.
like Nancy Pelosi is amazing in what she does. I could totally. I mean, AOC will certainly be relevant for, I would
Yeah.
say, for like eternity, basically. Like
Yeah.
seems
Nancy
like that
Pelosi, I
kind
don't
of.
have much of a opinion of. She is what she is, and she's in her 80s, I think. So I think she's gonna just keep telling people what to do from the side,
Yeah,
puppet mastering. Let me ask you this
yeah,
though.
yeah,
Oh, let me
yeah.
ask you this though, because I want to make sure we have time to do it. When you think about, you saw that the AC A16Z and the All In people, David Sachs, all of them, Kraft, they all were for Trump and certainly are now. What what do you think about um, balancing being a founder or an investor and having that conversation publicly, having an opinion about that, if it's especially if it's a dissenting opinion from theirs? And I know you actually are more insulated from it because you of what we talked about before, but you also work with a lot of founders and you kind of know the game, the Silicon Valley game. What do you think? How would you counsel someone who is, you know, at YC or not at YC and
Mhm.
they're fundraising and they're out there and they're playing the game, but they also don't agree with the Andreessens of the world?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, it's kind of an interesting time because I feel like normally, at least in my experience, like Silicon Valley was relatively apolitical in the sense that, and maybe that was, I don't know, bad in the sense that it was a monoculture, but it
Mm.
just felt like it wasn't something that you needed to bring up or talk about. And I do think that's generally the right, like what I think founders should mostly be focused on building their business and making sure that it's successful and aligning with people that can help them accomplish that mission. And I think that generally people are pretty good about that. Uh, I also think that it's important to understand that like no investor is that meaningful to the success of your business. I
Mm.
think everyone is marketing themselves and trying to earn sort of social capital in some way. But I don't know, like I do think the best investors I've had are they don't say that much. Like they're not on Twitter that actively.
Well, I
They're
must be a terrible investor for
well, this, it's just there. I mean,
I'm
there's a lot of
all
people who
over
are
Twitter.
very active
Yeah.
uh as well, but I do think that like they just don't really make or break the company as much as like your team does. Like I would be much
Yeah.
more concerned about, like internally to the company, how do you think about these things?
Yeah.
Um
That's a great point. That's a really great point. That's a
and
great point.
customers too, right?
Yeah.
Like if you talk loudly, like you
Yeah.
may alienate some
Yeah.
customers on either
Yeah.
side.
Yeah. I
Uh
mean, I think you should do that if that's what you want to do. I'm not saying don't do that for those reasons, but I agree with you that it's more important to make that decision about your internal team and your customers than it is investors. Investors may have a piece of that thought, but only a piece.
yeah. I think the biggest I think there's two other things I would say about this. I think the issue I find with some founders is they think they can do like I think it's important to understand like you can sort of vent about certain things, but at the end of the day, like your impact on that thing is very low as like just
Mm,
narrating the events. Like sometimes I think people get so caught up and it's like, but why are you spending like 2 hours a day like thinking about this thing that you can't do? If you want to do something about it, like you totally do something about it. Start a company, invest your time, like spend time on site, on location. uh I think whatever David Sachs and Andreessen say on the internet is not that impactful. I think what's impactful is like getting a meeting and talking about stuff. That has a much, and I would say do the same thing that they're doing in that way. Like if you're
mhm,
really passionate about something, like really get involved in the best way you possibly can.
mhm.
Uh, the Twitter stuff is just people, I think, mostly just trying to grow their follower accounts, and I think isn't as relevant to like most of these cabinet picks I've never heard about in my life. I don't know who they are, like I don't know who they
Yeah.
are. Like they didn't get there by tweeting. They got there by just being in the room, however they could be. Um,
Yeah, there's
and
definitely a starter pack for that group. I can tell you what that list is. There's a way to get there. What was the second?
and what was the second? Oh, I forgot the second.
Oh, it's
It
okay.
probably wasn't that important, I
It's
think.
okay. Well, it makes me think, like as much as I talk about it and as vocal as I am, and I it's very real. It's all authentic. I agree with you in that I love the fact that I can today speak so openly. I don't, I kind of feel like that's going to go, some of that's going to go away. I think that freedom is going to, some of that freedom will go away. But ultimately, what I'm saying is that I do enjoy the conversation and I do enjoy the fact that someone, who was homeless and broke and all that, I can have this much like say on a certain platform as this billionaire who I don't agree with. And that's why I think more people should speak up. If you're seeing something that you're not jiving with, you don't agree with, and you're like, oh, I can't believe they said that, and that guy has such an audience, and da da da, say something to counter it. That's how I feel about it. It's like counter it. And in that spirit, I just had this idea. We should do a podcast. We should have two other people, and it should be called All Out. Like as in go all out, because you and I probably are at 80% of what we agree on. And I
Mhm.
love the 80 and I really enjoy the 20. I really enjoy that. And just to count to the
Mhm.
all in podcast, I think that would be really, really interesting. All out, go all out.
All out. Yeah. Yeah. I think the second thing was that, sometimes, yeah, I don't know, they just get caught up in these games, and I think they're trying to make friends, like they're old men I think when people ask
Mm,
me, a lot of my friends like ask me like, "Oh, what do I think about this?" And I'm like, "Look, at the end of the day, like I'm a tech CEO who's like built a company that's now doing, tens of millions in revenue. Like why does my opinion matter?" Like it really, like it just doesn't matter. I'm not really affected by most of these things at this point, and I'm already in America. Like I've kind of, I just, I don't think the average American cares like what someone like me thinks. And so, most of these people who are, you know, backing Trump or backing Kamala or whatever, like they're generally in such a place of quote unquote privilege that I just think like I want to know what like my employees think. I want, I want to know what like the people I'm trying to hire think. I want to know what like the people just around me in real life think. Because I just think, I don't know, like working on the internet, working in software, it is such a privilege that you get kind of disconnected from what matters. Like I'm not that affected uh by anti-immigration or pro-immigration, frankly. Either way, it doesn't really affect my day to day. So all I can do is like talk to people who feel like they are affected and ask them, what they think. So I feel like I almost like lost my right to vote. Like I think the more successful you are, like the less your vote should matter in a way. And like
Mhm, mhm.
the government has, like less of an effect on your day to day. So uh
Yeah,
actually,
so
I will tell you that I did not even vote in this election. I
mhm.
chose not to vote
So this
because
is what we where the 20% is. You see what I'm saying? And I
yeah.
think I think people hearing us talk about both, but again with two other people, would be really
You're
interesting.
fun.
We'll see. We'll see. What do people think in the comments if you watch this far? What do you think about the all out idea or just hearing from Sahil again? Thank you so much, Sahil. This has been wonderful.